I'm Teisha Bader, and in the news, the horrific shooting yesterday at a high school in Florida where 17 people were killed. The mass shooting took place at the Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. The shooter, 19-year-old Nicholas Cruz, a former student. The victims, students and adults, among them Jewish students. And the local Jewish community is doing its best to cope with this tragedy. Last night, a healing and counseling service was held, organized by congregation called Tikvah in Parkland, along with other nearby synagogues and local Jewish Federation. Rabbi Bradd Boxman is the spiritual leader of Kol Tikvah, and he has been gracious enough to join us here on JBS to talk about what happened yesterday and how his community is coping. Rabbi Boxman, first let me just extend, on the behalf of all of us here at JBS, our deepest condolences, and thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thank you, Teisha. Appreciate that very much.
Of course. I can only imagine this has to be just an excruciating time for you, for your congregation, and for the community of Parkland at large. Can you give us a sense of what is going on? What are people feeling?
As you would imagine, and unfortunately from too many others that we know about, shock and horror and dismay. How one day a community that was voted actually one of the safest, if not the safest community in all of Florida, is shattered with such a horrendous act of violence. People are, our students are paralyzed with fear. Some of them are afraid to even go to the bathroom on their own, and these are teenagers, or to leave their homes, that they saw their friends lying motionless on the ground. The horror of witnessing a gunman come into their classroom and shoot randomly and kill people in front of them. Hiding in closets for upwards of 2 hours, 50 people in a space of maybe less than 50 feet. And parents who don't know what to say to their children and how to react. And I'm dealing with now putting together 3, maybe possibly 4 funerals in the next couple of days. And it's horrendous.
There really are no words. And I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for your personal loss of the congregation, of your community there. Obviously for Parkland as a whole, the fact that you are having to put together funerals for young people, I am guessing. And I know
they're
that's...
all teenagers, yeah.
They're all teenagers. I don't know how one reconciles something like this. And as a rabbi, I know you've dealt with comforting people. You've dealt with offering words when there has been a loss in a family. But this has to be something really that is challenging, I can only imagine, on a personal and on a professional level for you.
Unfortunately, I lived outside of New York City on 9/11 in Danbury, Connecticut, and had many of my congregants and family who lived in the city, and we had the same situation then. So unfortunately, I've been through this before, and we were able to mobilize quickly here because of that and have a command control center to try to reach out to every single member of our congregation that had a child in that school. Within an hour, we were able to identify who was in hiding, who we couldn't find, and who was safe through using our electronic media. And that was a big comfort to at least get a handle on the situation when it was so chaotic in the immediate aftermath. Now it's a matter of trying to hold hands and be able to reach out to those who are most directly affected, trying to bring them comfort, try to hold their hands. And the message I'm trying to bring is that this beautiful community, less than 24 hours ago, was the same community as it is today. We cannot forget the fact that one person cannot come and change the life of an entire community, even though it changed the lives of 17 individuals, and we'll have to be there for them. But this is a community that unfortunately has had this horrific event. But beyond that, yesterday nobody would ever in a million years imagine that this community would ever have to face this, like so many others have said.
Yes. And you mentioned that, unfortunately, you are having to deal with putting together, you said 3, possibly 4 funerals. And I know that you also have members of your synagogue that are injured. I didn't realize you had that many fatalities. And again, it's just horrible. You have still congregants hospitalized at this point, or do you have any more information on that status?
We have, I think, 2 that have gone through surgery, but they're doing okay.
Okay, well, we wish them a speedy recovery. Can you take us back to yesterday? How did you first hear about the shooting? Did you hear about it on the news? Did you get a phone call? What happened?
I got a text from one of my coworkers who heard about it. It was about while the act was going on. I was actually on my day off with my grandson, who was visiting from out of town, and I immediately dropped him off at home and came to the synagogue and began the efforts of trying to organize this response.
Now, you were saying that you had unfortunately experienced 9/11 closely, and because of that, it is quite impressive how quickly the Jewish community mobilized. In a lot of the media today, there are reports about your synagogue and what you provided last night, which was a 3.5-hour-long event, if I read correctly.
Correct.
Offering.
Yes.
How did that work? What did you had mental health professionals there? What did you do?
Correct. Right. First of all, I wanted the synagogue to be a place of refuge. I remember after 9/11 that people flocked to the synagogue because it was the one place that was an anchor in their life, a home away from home. In fact, after the event at the school, some of our kids, we have a ton of kids. It's a very young congregation. We have 300 kids in our school, 165 kids in our preschool. So, and it's only a less than 400 member congregation, so it's a very young congregation with a very young demographic in Parkland. And so many of the kids, when they escaped from the school, the first place they came a half a mile away was the synagogue. And they came streaming into the synagogue, and we were there to prepare to receive them and hold them and to offer them food and drink. By the evening, I knew people would want to come, and so we opened up the doors and said, come, and we'll be here. We had about a dozen mental health professionals from within the synagogue that I asked to be on hand. And then we let people talk and meet with these professionals, and then we held a brief service of remembrance and memorial and hope. And that was what we did yesterday. Today, the synagogue is a center, and we have mental health professionals here all day. We have groups of, I'd say, dozens of teens that are here being with their friends and doing supervised activities with our youth professionals. And I'm in the midst of, as I said, trying to reach out to these families that lost loved ones. And Shabbat will be our service of a memorial, not memorial, I don't want to turn Shabbat into memorial, but a Shabbat of community service of unity, which will be tomorrow evening at 7:30. Tonight there's a community-wide vigil that I'll participate in for the larger community.
That's really wonderful. We reported about that actually in our newscast today as well. You mentioned some of the things you're hearing from the students who were there, the fears that they're dealing with now, the trauma that they went through in the hours hiding from this shooter and seeing their friends on the ground. What do you say? What can you possibly say when you're dealing with that kind of trauma, that kind of a catastrophic event? What are some of the words that the mental health professionals who are sitting with these children and their parents, what do you say?
Right. Well, I think counterintuitively, it's not what you say at first. It's really just doing a lot of listening and absorbing. Those that have the ability to speak, let them speak and let them emote and tell the story, validate them for their story as an individual, the horror they witnessed. When Aaron in the Bible lost his 2 sons, his first response was complete silence, and I think the first message is we just listen. Beyond that, I think you hold physically and you cry with them. And words are very hard to come by in a moment like that. I think what we try to get the kids to see after we can talk is what can we do to, and it fell into 3 categories when we met with the kids just now. Some, to be there for the families. 2, why did this happen when many of the kids knew that this kid was dangerous, and how do we say something, that whole idea about mental health, and how do we reach out to people when we know that they're unbalanced before they become able to do something like this. The 3rd thing they talked about was that this is a textbook case of what's wrong with our country, in where mental illness was apparent for all to see and nobody did anything, and two, the access to a automatic rifle, which is a sin beyond all sins in this country. And many of them are so angry, the kids, they want to meet, they don't want to write letters, they want to meet eye to eye with our elected officials. And they want to look into their eyes and say, we in Parkland don't want to be the next statistic, the next Columbine, the next Aurora, the next Sandy Hook. They've said to me that they want to look into the eyes of these elected officials and tell them, you need to do this, you need to stop, because only you can. And they're angry, and that anger is going to come out after we get past this mourning process. And that's what you're hearing some of what I'm going to be speaking about tomorrow night as well.
Well, it's impressive that these students are making their voices heard in this way, and if we can certainly understand the anger and the frustration. As you mentioned, reports now in the media saying that the shooter, several things about him, that he was known to have been troubled. He was, as you said, had access to this firearm, posted things on social media. I won't repeat exactly what, but very, very strong red flags, very red flags that were ignored. And so
exactly.
If you were sitting on a board to make some sort of policy change, or just to brainstorm about how can we change this, what are your gut instincts?
Well, the kid was expelled from school for having a gun, from what I heard. Again, I don't know that for a fact. I'm just telling what I've heard. But I heard that he had a gun. He was expelled for that reason. So if he was expelled for that and perhaps other violent reasons that we don't know yet, then was he just left to be on his own? What follow-up was there within the social system? And again, I'm not pointing fingers because I don't know all the facts, but I'm wondering what kind of follow-up was there with this very disgruntled kid who was crying out for help with anybody that would have seen any of these posts or any of these social media or YouTube. And what obligation do we have to someone who's expelled from school after they're expelled from school, especially if it was for having a firearm? Now, when I heard, and I only know what I've heard on the news, is that he was able to get by himself an automatic rifle. Why would someone, without any kind of background check, apparently he's expelled from school, that should be a red flag. For having a gun, that should be another red flag. Just do it. If it's out on the media that you can just look and see his Facebook page or whatever, you would say, whoa, this isn't somebody we should be selling an automatic rifle to. There's a big problem. So that's what I would be saying, is the connection between a kid who's obviously disgruntled and the easy access to getting a firearm such as that.
And you yourself, it's what you're saying makes perfect sense, and you are an adult, and we as adults are perhaps supposed to have some answers, and yet you're having to sit with children, students, teenagers who are saying, how is this possible? And, we don't have the answers. I disagree with you, Teisha. We have the answers. We don't have the will. Okay.
The will isn't there, unfortunately, to take on the NRA and to take on those who are gun owners who see that somehow any kind of legislation whatsoever, any common sense legislation, is a threat to them. And I'm sick and tired of hearing them say that, it will still happen. Of course it will still happen. We have car accidents that will happen from today till tomorrow, but it doesn't mean that we don't put airbags in.
Right. And
it's the most ridiculous argument I've heard in my life when people say that. Or they say, you're going to take away my guns. No one's taking away their guns. It's called, no one should have an automatic rifle. I'm talking to Israeli friends right now. In Israel, where there's a gun culture to begin with out of necessity, they don't have these problems. They have mental health in Israel just like we do. But they don't have those issues because they're not allowed to have an automatic rifle. And the only ones allowed to have guns as private citizens, other than, when they're in the army, are those that have a special permission because they may be living in settlement towns where they need to have extra protection. But the average Israeli isn't allowed to have a firearm.
It is interesting, and I do think about that a lot because people don't necessarily know that when you're in the army in Israel, when you're in the IDF, most soldiers bring home their firearm. You said they're not an automatic weapon, but there are guns in the house. Right? And we don't see this kind of a phenomenon. We see other phenomenons. Of course, Israel has its own issues, but we don't see this phenomenon.
Or many other countries in the free world that have mental illness but don't have these repeated events month after month after month.
Right. And you talked about 9/11, and I'm wondering, as a rabbi, as a spiritual leader, as a community leader, how do these events, these catastrophic events, tragedies, impact, or do they impact on how you serve, how you see your role in the Jewish community and beyond?
The role is very simple, is that Judaism offers a path to help to make sense out of an often senseless world. And one of the ways we do that, first and foremost, is through community. Again, the synagogue became the refuge. This was the place where you want to come when you need to know that you're going to be safe emotionally and physically. And I think that's the first thing that we do as Jewish leaders, to create that space, both emotionally and spiritually, and then to help them on the road to recovery, to use the tools of our tradition that have within it the spiritual nourishment and sustenance to help people find a way forward. And for some it will be easier and some will be harder, but we have to get there all together. And so that's the beauty of community when the face of tragedy, and that good that comes out of the bad. And the only thing I want to remind people over and over again is that one sick individual unfortunately wreaked havoc for a short period of time that will leave a mark for all time, but should not change the way we lived our lives the day before. And that's the message people have to know, is that their lives did not change unalterably forever, that we have to be able to remember what was here 24 hours ago. And I'll just use, and I end with this because I have to really get to tending to my flock, is that it's kind of like a sun and an eclipse. The eclipse of the sun darkens things for a while, but then the eclipse goes away and the sun is still there, and the sun never left. It was just the eclipse that took away the sun for a period of time. And people have to remember the sun never went away, and the sun is still there, and it will come back again.
Well, those are lovely words, Rabbi, and I know, as you just said, there are a lot of people there who need you. There is a lot that you have to do, and I know there are still people in the community you're trying to reach, and you're offering such invaluable services to those who are really in desperate need. And we want to just, again, thank you for taking time away from that to speak with us about your efforts, and we wish you only good things, and somehow, as you mentioned, some light out of this tragedy, and strength and comfort, and we hope for better days ahead.
Thank you very much for letting people know what's going on here in Parkland. I appreciate it. All right, take care. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Rabbi. Rabbi Bradd Boxman is the spiritual leader of congregation called Tikvah in Parkland, Florida, and we truly appreciate his time with us, and extend again our deepest condolences to all those who were affected by this tragedy. As always, thank you to our director and production coordinator, Sloan Copeland, JBS Associate Director, Dara Golub, and to our editors, Jonathan McDevitt and Cordelia Saporin, and our producer, Carol Lilienthal. I'm Teisha Bader for this edition of In the News.